Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. And after a hectic and fascinating week at Chelsea, it is lovely to be back in the peace and calm of my own garden. And at this point in the year, there's an awful lot going on, but it is a time of change. There's a real sense of transition going from spring into summer. But there's a certain amount of tweaking you have to do to make the best of that transition. And that's all part of the enjoyment and the skill of gardening. But there's one transition that is much more drastic and which is finite. And that's what's happening to the two big bamboos, the Philostachys, that I've got here in the grass borders. There's one on that side and one in the other corner. And I've had them growing in these borders for at least 10 years. And they've been completely happy, but they've started to flower. Now, of course, when a plant flowers, that's normally a cause for celebration. But I'm afraid that's not the case with bamboo. In fact, it can be terminal. And certainly the bamboo will never be the same again because they only flower once and that's it. So if you're seeing your bamboos with this cluster of small flowers that almost look like dead growth on the end, I'm afraid that isn't very good news. So the thing to do is to cut out any decent canes, use them, and see if there's regrowth, but don't be surprised if there isn't. That could be the end of the story. Whereas the bamboos in the pots that I've got here are looking a bit straggly, but that's because it's new growth, and that will soon put on new leaf. It's only if they've got flowers that you need to be worried. Now, coming up on today's programme. Carol is surrounded by colour as she visits a garden in Oxfordshire planted entirely with annuals.
You get instant impact. And you get it, what's more, in a whole kaleidoscopic range of colours.
We meet an artist and wildlife expert who has transformed his garden into a wildlife haven.
What we wanted was something which was rich in wildlife, but also really good, full of flowers and attractive to look at as well. And I think we have achieved that.
This year, Adam is designing a show garden for Gardener's World Live, and we join him as he starts on that journey.
Walking through here, this place is rammed with inspiration. You've got the scent of garlic, fallen trees that are left. A lot of this is about shapes and forms and the patterns that wild planting creates. Fantastic.
And I will be revealing for the first time a new part of the garden here at Longmeadow. I said we're in a period of transition, but of course that means the arrival of lovely things as well as the disappearance of others. And here in the Jewel Garden, the dominant colour is purple from the alliums. This is purple sensation, but it can be a bit dominant. But this year, I think we've got it about right. And I love the Iris sibirica with its bluey mauve colour. However, the plants that are going over are not looking so good, obviously. And a really good example is the Imperial Fritillary. But it's a mistake to cut them back because you want to let the plant die back as much as possible, and that will feed next year's bulb. Whereas if you grow bulbs in pots, like these tulips, you can be more proactive. And I'm now going to empty these pots and use them for summer planting. So, first thing to do is to take the seed heads off. And I would recommend doing this on any tulips or daffodils that you grow in pots. So I'm going to just cut around the edges. Okay, that's the easy bit. Now the tricky bit. Lift this up, and this is why I've got the barrow here. Hope this comes out in one piece. Yeah, there we go, not too bad. There we go. That out the bottom, that can go back in there. And this now will go into a plastic pot. I lift the whole thing up like that, hoping it doesn't fall apart. And if it doesn't, at the end of the rod, there we go. That's all I need. Now, I will put this somewhere that gets at least half a day's sunlight. It must have some sun, and the more the better. and leave it until there is no green in the foliage or the stems at all. So we'll put those to one side for the moment. Now I've got this pot, which I can use for a summer display. And what I've got are dahlias. Now, these are both a dahlia called David Howard, and I love David Howard. It's got a slightly darker leaf and a wonderful orange flower. And you can see that with these, I've cut them back. I've cut back the stem, and we've got side shoots developing. Don't be frightened of doing this, because the side shoots will have more flowers. Now this is a very different mix to the tulip mix. The key to growing tulips is drainage. Dahlias, on the other hand, although they do need some drainage, need more food. So use a peat-free compost and then some perlite or grit to open it out. We'll take that out. And pop that in. And then fill in around it. Now obviously that needs a good soak now, and then I will water it once a week, and when I water it I'll also feed it from now on. And I use a quite dilute liquid seaweed, and that will keep the flower production going. Now I shall be planting some of these larger pots with dahlias, but the vast majority will go in the borders, and I'll do that as space appears. And as well as the dahlias, we'll be adding masses of annuals. And Carol's been to Oxfordshire to look at the range of glorious annuals that can brighten up our summer gardens.
Us gardeners can sometimes face all sorts of quandaries. Perhaps we've got a new garden with vast empty spaces that need filling. Or perhaps we've got perennial borders that could just do with zhuzhing up a bit. Well, there's one group of plants that can come to our aid cheaply, easily, and what's more, we can do it in just 1 year. It's the annuals. An annual is exactly what it says. It's a flower whose seed is sown, that flowers and dies, never to be seen again, all in 1 year. Unlike herbaceous perennials, which flower, die back, and flower again year after year. So you might ask, why bother with annuals? Annuals have so much to offer. You get instant impact, and you get it, what's more, in a whole kaleidoscopic range of colours. And they're so diverse, everything from great He-Man sunflowers down to ground-hugging plants. They last so long and they're so incredibly floriferous. So, of course, they're full of pollen and nectar, and they're the most brilliant plants for all sorts of pollinating insects. There are two different kinds of annuals. There are half-hardy annuals that can't stand the frost, and then there are hardy annuals. Now, this border is completely composed of half-hardy annuals. It's a picture now. It looks like a sweet shop, but if you were to come along here in May, you'd see nothing but bare ground. But then the plants are moved in. Small plants grown from seed but planted into modules, and they're put out. Tiny, tiny little plants, but within weeks they've started to burgeon, and then later in the summer, this is what you get. And what a show it is. Just look at this beautiful cosmos. This is one called Bright Lights, very aptly named too. Yellow, orange, red almost at its edge, and in perfect contrast is this ageratum next door, with these fluffy flowers. That's one called Blue Horizon. And then, in the background, this wonderful stand of French marigolds, tagetes, and that's Burning Embers, very apt for these dark, cinnamon-coloured flowers. It's wonderful to see all those brightly coloured packets of seed, isn't it, in the spring? But it's even more exciting to collect your own seed and grow your own plants from it. All you've got to do is wait for a nice, dry, sunny day. No good doing it on a damp day because your seed will rot. And then collect your seed just at the point when nature tells you to. In other words, when the plant itself is ready to distribute its seed everywhere. So I'm going to take some seed from this calendula. Very straightforward, and all you do is find one that's really, really ripe. Break it off. Take it in your hand and just gently remove those seeds from the seed head. And each one of those seeds is going to make a plant of this kind of size and have masses of flowers. When you're sowing your seed, you've got several choices. You can either distribute it, broadcast it, or you can grow it in a tray or a pot. And that way, even if you haven't got a garden, you can have annuals galore to grace any pot or container. You can use annuals in so many different ways. Often they're used to create a quite naturalistic effect, but not here. Here, everything is very, very deliberate, almost regimented. What happens is that these big triangular shapes are made, and within each one, small plug plants are put out early in the year. And you end up with these great big blocks of colour living cheek by jowl in interlocking triangles right the way through the border. You could achieve the same sort of effect, but probably on a much smaller scale, by direct sowing. In that case, you'd have to use hardy annuals because you'd have to sow those seeds quite early in the spring or possibly in the previous autumn. Classically, annuals are often used to fill in gaps in our beds and borders. Here, that idea is given a really modern twist by planting them alongside perennial grasses. Zinnias are superb. To me, they're kind of old-fashioned plants. My granddad used to grow them. But what I love about them is the variety of colour. You can get all sorts of different seed mixes, but the ones I prefer, and more importantly, the ones that pollinating insects prefer, are the single ones, where you can actually see these big centres full of pollen and nectar. They're a brilliant, brilliant range of colour, really easy to grow. From a February sowing, you can put them on your windowsill or in the greenhouse, and you'll get little plants that you can put out at the end of May, after the frosts have passed. Then they'll start to flower at the end of July and go right the way through until October or so. If you deadhead them, that will encourage further flowers to develop and give you a much longer flowering period. One annual that's become extremely popular in recent years and is one of the most dramatic plants you could possibly grow is Amaranthus. This one is Amaranthus hoppy red dye. It's glorious with these deep crimson, almost beetroot coloured leaves, and then these long panicles of drooping flowers. It keeps those panicles even when it turns to seed, and it does seed itself around absolutely everywhere. Those seeds, though, have quite important economic significance. It's quinoa. It's in that same family, and it's grown worldwide, both for its seeds and for its leaves, which are also edible. I'd want to grow it just for these magnificent flowers. It brings real panache to the border. Annuals may be with us only for a year, but we should grow them every year.
That was at Aston Pottery in Oxfordshire last September. But sow annuals now and they will start flowering in a month or so's time. And this relates to a little experiment that I did a few weeks ago. I'd sowed 3 lots of zinnia seeds, the same variety. It's called Purple Prince. And I used a heated propagator, another identical batch in a sealed plastic bag to keep in the moisture, and another one just sewing them on a seed tray. All three were put side by side on the same south-facing windowsill. Now, what we noticed was that, unsurprisingly, those in the heated propagator germinated much quicker than the other two. They started to appear after a few days. They were followed by the ones in the plastic bag about 4 days later, and then quite a bit later by the ones that had no assistance at all. But now, looking at them, all three are pretty much the same size. So after 3 or 4 weeks, it's a level playing field. The main conclusion you can draw from that is that a heated propagator is really useful to get things going quickly. If you're short of space or short of time, or if you have plants like chilies or tomatoes that need heat, a good substitute is simply to put it in a polythene bag. It really helps by keeping the moisture in. And if you're not in a hurry, just sowing them on a windowsill or in a porch or in a greenhouse is absolutely fine. Now, I haven't pricked out this batch, so I want to do it. Holding by a leaf, not a stem, because we don't want to damage it, just ease a seedling out. And you can see I've got a nice amount of root there. So we then make room for it with the dibber and pop it in and just gently push it into place. So let's take another one. And of course, what we're doing by this is reducing the competition for space and therefore increasing the chance of really good, healthy root growth for each of the plants. Now, while I'm doing this, we're going to visit, I was going to say one of your gardens, but in fact, it's one of your allotments.
Welcome to you all. This is Newport in South Wales, our council allotment. And my name is Farida. I live in an urban area and I struggle with finding enough growing space, enough sunny spot when germinating seeds. And this year I'd like to share with you the method that happened to be extremely successful. It's the seed snail method. It's a roll of soil with seeds in it. It costs you nothing because it's made out of recycled materials. You know, this is polythene wrapping foam, but you can also make it from plastic or a sandwich bag, any material really. So you roll it like this. At this point you can use a sellotape, you can use elastic band, or you can just put it in a right size pot and keep it safe like this. So now I will push the soil down, place your seeds and sprinkle some soil on top. All my aubergines, peppers, tomatoes were started in a snail. I've also experimented this year starting corn in a snail. And this is celeriac. Look at the root system of each one of these plants. Can you believe that I didn't have to do any repotting, transplanting? Beautiful. So if you are struggling with looking after your seedlings, especially those little ones like celeriac or onions, this is the method for you to try because it's very low maintenance.
I think that's a brilliant idea, Farida. Certainly not something I'd ever seen or tried before, but I will now. And by the way, we love receiving tips, ideas, innovations, eccentricities, anything that can add to our sum of knowledge, so please don't be shy about sending them in. And you can go to our website to get all the information about how you can do that. Now, I'm in the long walk, and we've had, to be honest, a really difficult winter and spring with the long walk, because we used to have down here an avenue of clipped box cones, but the box suffered terribly from box blight last year. So we cleared the whole space. And the whole point of the long walk from day one has been it is this calm green space dividing the cottage garden on one side and the jewel garden on the other. So I want to keep that sense of the gap between two busy gardens. And after lots of discussion, what we've decided to do is make a lawn. Now, for many years, we haven't really had a lawn here at Longmeadow, but I was watching my grandchildren play the other day, and I realized that what was lovely was seeing them charging up and down, just feeling at ease, that they didn't have to bash into plants or keep off this or not do that. This is somewhere where they could play. Now, any lawn, whether you turf or sow it, is only as good as the preparation. So you start off by digging it over and weeding it. Then leave it for a few weeks and let more weeds come through. Weed it again. Then rotivate it, and then rake it, and maybe rake it 2 or 3 times. Try to get rid of all lumps of soil bigger than a marble. Now, your grass seed. Because I want the children to play on it, I want a tough grass, which means including ryegrass. The next thing is you need to make sure you've got the right amount. Now, according to this mix, it's 30 grams per square metre. And this is enough to do 6 metres of this width. So I've put canes at 6 metre intervals all the way down. And the secret is to sow evenly. Don't be tempted to sow too thick. The next step is to rake it in. By raking it, you bury the seed and you help spread it and distribute it more evenly. And when that's done, you need to either have scarecrows or wires or something to stop the birds eating it. Actually, this particular seed comes with a deterrent, which is salty, apparently, and birds don't like the taste. And the grass will not germinate and grow if it's too dry. So don't let it dry out until the grass is growing strongly. Well, watching me rake isn't that fascinating. So let's go to Dartmoor and visit the Devon home of John Walters. Now, John is a superb naturalist, and it's not surprising that he's made his garden a haven for wildlife.
We first moved into the house 25 years ago now. The garden was all very neat and tidy. The previous owners had looked after it. It was a nice, neat estate garden. But that's not the sort of thing my wife and I like, so I ended up just digging it all up. What we wanted was something which was rich in wildlife, but also really good, full of flowers and attractive to look at as well. And I think we have achieved that between us. She sort of tidies it up, and I leave little wild bits around the edges. This was barren, pretty well nothing lived in here, but now we've recorded over 40 species of bee just in here. At this time of year, this patch of comfrey is a magnet for bees. It catches the sun in between the showers. One of the main bees attracted to this is one of my favourites, the hairy-footed flower bee. And that's named because the males have these big, hairy middle legs. It starts flowering here, usually early March, just as the bees are coming out. The males generally emerge first, and they're sort of buffy-coloured with yellow faces, and they patrol around the patch of flowers, trying to intercept the black females when they come in and mate with those. See, this female now is lying in between all the flowers, just stocking up on nectar. And she'll carry on. She's gone off elsewhere in the garden now as it starts to rain. I've been passionate about wildlife ever since I was tiny. When I was 5, I collected some caterpillars of some small tortoiseshell butterflies and reared those at home on the nettles. I remember seeing the amazing, like, Egyptian mummy type chrysalis with all these gold spots on, and then this amazing butterfly coming out of it. So I was totally entranced by that, and I have been ever since, really. Having a pond in your garden is a really easy way to attract wildlife. And this is a mug of mine. The handle broke off the other week. Rather than throw it away, I'll make a little mini pond for frogs, because these are, it might be small, but it's actually really important, particularly in the last few summers when we've had these intense heat waves. So a few of these dotted around the garden. It's another little mini aquatic habitat for things to live in. This lilac here produces a lovely display of white blossom in May, and it's quite stunning and very attractive to insects. During the winter, I skewer some apples into the trees to feed the local blackbirds, and when it's very cold you'll get things like fieldfares and redwings coming in. And also we get blackcaps, which I can watch from the kitchen window, which is great in the winter. Well, lots of people have bee hotels in their garden, so we thought, well, why don't we make some cob brick bee hotels? So all you need to start with is some clay-rich soil. You add a bit of water, but like making pastry, you just add a little bit at a time. Really just get in there with your hands and scrunch it up. And add a little bit of sand, not too much. And a little bit of straw as well, which just binds it all together. That looks about enough for a brick. If I make them into bricks, so I can stack them on top of each other, but you could make it into any shape you like, really. Bees will naturally go into little crevices in the cob wall and they'll excavate a hole, but as this is specially for them, I just help them on their way. The important thing is to leave it to dry slowly so it doesn't crack, and within a week or two it's ready for the bees to use. Some of the garden is a bit sort of unofficial, really. So this is an edge along our fence line here. You get all this amazing vegetation. So there's a lot of red valerian, which the butterflies are on. And in the summer we get hummingbird hawk moths, which are migrant moths, which come up from the Mediterranean. They love the valerian to nectar on, and they love bedstraws. So I encourage some of this bedstraw to grow. I think it's good to be a little bit lazy, really, and because it's really good for the wildlife. Let it flourish and the insects will love you. So we don't use any pesticides or any chemicals of any sort in our garden here. Over the years we found which plants can survive all the slugs and snails. The things that do really well, we allow just to spread around as they like, so it's not really, so it's quite organic really way of gardening. These beautiful blue forget-me-nots, the lesser celandine, beautiful yellow sunny flowers. I tell you, spring is on the way, really. For me, the real beautiful flowers are the native wild flowers, and that's all for the benefit of the insects which live here and for me as well. When we go to garden centres, what we tend to do is go into the outdoor bit and then just see which plants all the insects are going to and then buy those. This Stachys lamb's ear has super furry leaves. And the reason I grow this one and put it in a nice sunny spot is to attract a very special bee called a wool carder bee. They're related to leafcutter bees, but instead of cutting leaves, they actually collect the wool from, naturally they do it from native woodworts, but as this Stachys is so furry, they just, if this is around, they go for this. And she collects like a cotton wool ball under her jaws, and they fly off and they make little cotton wool sleeping bags for to put their larvae in. Well, after spending so much time and effort creating this garden, it's just really good for you. It's really relaxing. All life is connected, and so all these even plants and things are related to me and you in a very distant way, for millions and millions of years, but they're still, if you trace back your family tree far enough, they're your relatives. So it's being amongst your friends and family, really.
It sounds so simple, but John's statement that everything is connected, of course, is the key to it, because we think that we're acting upon one thing with maybe a fungus that we want to destroy with a fungicide, or a caterpillar that's eating something we want, but of course that is prey for something else. Everything is interlinked. And by setting up your garden to encourage as much diversity of wildlife as possible, the better balance it has. And the better balance it has, the healthier it is. And everybody benefits. This little area, which we call the wildlife garden, I've deliberately tried to create just that. As much diversity within a small space as I can and keep it looking good. And certainly at the moment, at this point at the end of May, it's doing just that. So we've got a pond, and there are frogs sitting on the logs in front of me, and water beetles, and of course that whole host of subaqua life that you don't see, but it's really important. And at this time of year in May, round the edge, you've got the Iris pseudochorus and the various colours of yellow, and the Iris sibirica, the red campion, the cow parsley, all looking fantastic. And so it's beautiful, but it's really working for insects. And for the birds, we've got trees and shrubs and hedges so they can nest, and it's safe for them. And sitting here, I can hear the wood pigeon, I can hear a blackbird, and a robin, just there. And then in the background, just tweeting away the sparrows. And if I sat here longer, I'd hear many more. And I do feel that if you can create a garden that is really rich for wildlife, it's going to be good for you. Just sitting in a garden, enjoying it in its entirety, is my idea of happiness. Right, still to come on today's programme. We join Adam as he seeks inspiration for his show garden at Gardener's World Live.
So what I want to do is I want to take that woodland, this pub garden, and more or less fuse the two. Well, that's what I'm hoping to do, anyway.
And we visit a garden that is simply bursting with seasonal colour.
There's such a variety of colour and shape and size of bloom, scent. There's one for everyone. I think you've got to like rhododendrons, haven't you? Come on.
This area of the garden has undergone big changes this spring. We used to have here a small paved area in the middle, surrounded by box hedges, but they were much wider than they were high. And I like them very much, but they suffered terribly from box blight. So this spring we took them out and have paved the area, because this gets fabulous evening light between April and September. Now, because this is going to be where we eat, I'm going to plant a pot of very basic Mediterranean herbs. Now I'm going to start with rosemary. And this is an upright variety called Miss Jessop's Upright, which is great for a pot because it leaves room around it to grow other herbs. And I've got some sage. Now this is Salvia officinalis. By the way, if you're growing salvia for cooking, much better to have sage that's green. Green sage is better for the kitchen than purple sage. And finally, we have thyme. Now, this is actually lemon thyme, but ordinary thyme is as good as anything else. All three share the same growing conditions. They are Mediterranean herbs, and they like really good drainage and critically poor soil, and that's what you have to try and recreate. So, we've got all this grit, and underneath it, I've got a bag of peat-free compost, and I'm going to mix them up. The ideal mix is 50% horticultural grit, 50% peat-free compost. Right, that is perfect. That's exactly what I want. Now, this pot has got a big drainage hole. So, you need a big crock over that. We need to make sure that our very free draining mix doesn't fall through the bottom. So we'll put some compost in. Right. That's about right. when you buy herbs, they tend to be in what you might call quite a rich compost. This is only a temporary compost. If they're to thrive and grow to their best, they do need this really, really sharp drainage. So pop that there like that, and then the sage can go around it. And my plan is to have the herbs to hand. If you just want to add a few fresh herbs to your meal, there's nothing like it. So finally, we'll add the thyme. Now, thyme is the one that likes shade least. Okay, that goes there like that. So that's it. That's really simple. So all I need to do now is just top that up. Right. There's one final finishing touch, which both makes it look better and also has a practical purpose, which is to add a layer of grit onto the surface. And the reason why it's practical is because when it rains or you water it, the compost will splash up and go on the leaves, and this will keep it clean. So just fill in the gaps. And as for watering, I would say a light watering weekly. And the water should run out the bottom. And if you're putting them on a hard surface, put them up on chocks. And this means that we have fresh, delicious Mediterranean herbs where we're going to eat, and it looks good too. Now, Adam is a very highly esteemed garden designer with many gold medals to his name. And this year, he is creating a garden for Gardeners World Live, and we joined him at the early stages as he was working out his plans.
I am in June going back to Gardeners World Live to create a show garden, and I've not done that for a good few years. So I am a little nervous, if I'm honest. But you know what, creating a garden, I can remember when I first started to design, I'd come into the office, I'd sit there for 8 hours with a white piece of paper and trying to be creative. And a blank piece of paper is a no-no for inspiration. You need to get out and find some. And that is what we're going to do. Come on, Isla. For me, when it comes to putting a garden together, I suppose it's about 4 things: place, space, plants, and the last thing is people. But actually, in reality, that's the first thing. So when I'm creating a show garden, funnily enough, that's the first thing I do, is I create the people that I'm designing the garden for. And then I start to put this little garden together. Walking through here, this place is rammed with inspiration. You got the scent of garlic in the air, fallen trees that are left, and then others have got canopies that have lifted. And what I tend to do is I write all these words down. Look at that through there. It's what I call my little picking path. So wild garlic either side, and just sort of a really thin path. You can go in, help yourself, come back out, and not really damage anything. Lovely. Look at the way that the nut trees just popping up through. You start to think, a lot of this is about shapes and forms and the patterns that wild planting creates. Fantastic. It's funny, isn't it, when you think about gardening and where it all started for me, and it was with my grandparents. I was lucky enough to have 2 real inspirational ladies, one tidy nan and the other being scruffy nan, and Tidy Nan, they had this classic sort of 70s garden, rectangular lawn, concrete path. And if I was a good boy, I could run down the path in the morning, open the greenhouse and get that early scent of tomatoes. I love now growing food and putting it on the table. But also, if I wasn't there, I was along the road at Scruffy Nan's, and that was a completely different experience. Some people would say it was chaotic. I like to think she was slightly more artistic. Everything felt more instinctive. All of a sudden it would seed around, she would leave it. There was a freedom, but also there was a connection to nature. So it was lovely having this blend between the two. It's strange, isn't it? Even now, all these years on, there's not many days go by when Tidy Nan or Scruffy Nan doesn't get a thought. She's not listening to a word I'm saying. Are you? I should think you can only smell garlic. I think with a show garden, you know, it's probably a little bit self-indulgent. It is going to be about that freedom, wildness, slightly instinctive, but also at the same time, food is going to play a huge part. I've always had a fascination with cooking, and think about where we've just been. Been into a woodland, it was peaceful, you could hear the wildlife, there was a sense of calm about it. And now I've come into one of my local pubs that's got an incredible kitchen garden. And this in the summer is absolutely buzzing. They're barbecuing, people are having fun. The whole idea of plot to plate, I love it. So what I want to do is I want to take that woodland, this pub garden, and more or less fuse the two. Well, that's what I'm hoping to do, anyway. So, it's time to show you the design. But before I do, remember that I said ultimately gardens are about people, and I create this person in my head for show gardens before I put pen to paper. And this person is a chef. The chef gets a new place, quite a long, thin garden. But the end of this garden, when they move in, it's totally and utterly overgrown. So they go out to one Sunday and they start clearing away. And they come across all these gnarly old apple trees. And as they're investigating, they find a stream that's running right through the middle. So what I've done is I've created a bridge that cuts through the garden. It also goes over the stream. To one side of that is the apple trees that sit in a meadow. But the meadow's not just going to be ornamental, it's going to be planted with edibles. And that's going to be the feel of the garden in a way. I don't want it to be rows and rows of vegetables. I want this idea that it's an ornamental veg garden. So your ornamentals are going to sit with your edibles, you know, the herbs and the fruits. So as you come across the bridge, you then end up at the table, which is the central space. I want it to feel relaxed, comfortable, but at the same time, somewhere where you could go and just celebrate food and you can pick, cook and enjoy. So, that is it. It's only on a piece of paper at the moment. Next, I'm off to sort out the plants, which in reality is the fun bit.
Well, we will see the results of Adam's plans at Gardeners World Live, which is just in a couple of weeks' time. But at this time of year, as we shift from spring into summer, there's a transition period where a lighter touch is needed to keep the flow moving and some quite tricky decisions to be made. For example, here in the writing garden, the leucosium, the summer snowflake, looks fantastic in April. Giant snowdrops is what they look like, flowing alongside the path and looking great. But the downside of leucosium, rather like Camasias, is they have a very strong foliage that takes quite a while to die back. And we all know with all bulbs that unless you let them die back completely, you will hinder the quality and the quantity of flowering next spring. But if I do that, it takes up space where I've got other plants I want to go in to keep that flow going. So, for example, I've got a tray here of Orlea. This is an annual with a lovely white umbel of flower in June and July and maybe even into August. And I want to get them in the ground, but there's no room. So the solution is to cut back some of the snowflake in the knowledge that A, that will make room for me, but B, I will accept a little bit of collateral damage and slightly less dramatic display from the snowflakes. The good news is that Leucojum is a very strong plant and can get a bit dominant. So by cutting it back, I'm controlling that dominance to a certain extent. And all I need is just a bit of bare soil so I can get a plant in. And these were seeds sown in March. There's roots to be seen, and they will grow well. And the sooner I get them in the ground, the bigger they will grow, and the sooner they will flower. I'll work my way through, just carefully thinning enough to get this tray in. Now, the writing garden is a subtle place. I want the greens and the whites to form a gentle mixture that flows through. But last May, we went to the edge of the Peak District to visit a gardener which couldn't be more different. It belongs to Pete Tighe, where he grows hundreds of different varieties of rhododendrons and azaleas.
Rhododendrons definitely out of fashion. Yeah, they get a bad rap at times, but now we can live with that. There's such a variety of colour and shape and size of bloom, scent. There's one for everyone. Can they make a comeback? Whoa, I don't know. Yeah. I think you've got to like rhododendrons, haven't you? Come on. We're here at Lee Gardens near Matlock. We're a very unique collection of rhododendrons and azaleas in a woodland setting. We've got 650 different varieties. We've got a lot of history here as a family. I'm third generation now, so I've been here at the gardens for 37 years, growing plants, looking after the garden. Rhododendrons are one of the largest plant genuses of them all, so they come from all over. You've got them from Labrador, we got them from Japan, from the Himalayas, and there's a lot of hybrids as well. This is Lee Rainbow. This is unique to the gardens here. This came from 100 plants that we bought off a hybridizer. Out of 100 plants, this was one of the 3 that were any good. And this is a lovely pink-edged yellow. It's really unusual in the rhododendron world to have those sort of colourings and hold them. So we've named it Lee Rainbow, which is quite fitting. There is a rhododendron for every situation. We've got big ones, we've got little ones, we've got medium ones, varieties that do very well in pots. What we've got here is a group of the Eucusimanum hybrids. We've got a lot of key features which suit a modern garden or a pot. So they're compact, they're 3 feet, they're hardy, a lot have got a good leaf, and we've got quite a range of colour in them. Most are pink to whites, but what we've got here, we've got Percy Wiseman, which is a pink, then goes through an apricot and finishes up a speckled cream. It's a cracking plant. Walking through the garden, a lot of it is now mature and the canopy is quite high, but that gives a different perspective. Conroy, which is a Cinnamerinum group plant. It's got a blue-green leaf, and it's not like a blousy flower. You have to sort of get under it, and see through the canopy, and you can see the striping and the sparkle in the waxy bell, and it really is a lovely thing. It's got a bit of a tie, this one, to the gardens, because the original planter of the gardens, John Marsden Smedley, he was inspired by trips to Exbury and Bodnant, and this is one of their hybrids, so it's nice to have this one as one of our feature plants in the gardens. Being a spring garden, we are a bit like farmers, and springtime now is harvest time, so we work up to a height of colour and we work down, but generally look fantastic in April and May. So we're slow to start, slow to finish, but crazy in the middle, you know, when everyone wants to see the plants at their best. One of my favourites is Nancy Evans. It's a good performer, it flowers every year. It's a good red base yellow, very good habit, good performer year after year. So when looking after rhododendrons, we need to keep them moist, especially this time of year, because the sun's out, it's drying them out, and that flower structure needs a lot of water to support it. On top of that, we need ericaceous compost, which is a nice acidic compost, well drained, and just admire it. We love the place. We sort of look after it. We tend it, we care for it. We're just the caretakers. We're here until we pass it on to the next one. We have a position of privilege, and yeah, I'd say we're proud to do what we do here.
I think Pete was a little harsh on himself. I think rhododendrons can be absolutely glorious, as he proved in his garden. Now, I've got two vegetables here which I want to grow together, but we're going to start with courgettes. At this time of year, you want to be a little bit wary about planting out any of the squash family too early, whether you're growing cucumbers, pumpkins, squashes, courgettes. Remember, these are plants that like warm weather. Now, I've got a variety here called Romanesco, dark green, and they're absolutely delicious, and the more you pick them, the more they will go on producing. But don't be tempted to plant them too close together. So, although I've got 4 plants in the tray, I'm actually going to plant out just 2 on this bed. And as a rule of thumb, a square metre per plant is really as close as they want to be. Now, as a rule, when you plant anything, it's better to plant it a little bit high than a little bit low. But with courgettes and squashes, you want to plant them in a distinct saucer. So what that means is that when I water it, I'm watering into a saucer. So the water isn't going to run off sideways, it's all going to go down to those roots. They do need plenty of water. And like all squashes, they're hungry, greedy plants. So this soil's had a lot of compost added, so it's really rich. Now, around them, I've got plenty of space, and until they grow, that space would remain empty and maybe get weedy and be unproductive. So, I'm going to plant sweet corn. These are seedlings that I sow direct into the plugs. And all my life so far, I've potted them on. I would take it out, let's take one out for you like that, and I would put that into a 3-inch pot, grow it on until it was about 2 foot tall, and then plant it out. However, I have been told by a friend that they always plant them out from plugs and they romp away and there's no problems. So I thought I'd give it a go. Now, with sweet corn, they must be planted in a grid because they are pollinated by the wind. And that means that the wind, from whatever direction it comes from, is going to pollinate the other plants. This is a variety called Swift. named not because of its speed of growth, but after the bird, the swift. But it is fairly early, and it's really tasty. And I firmly believe that anything edible you grow should be judged by taste first, second, and third, and everything else thereafter. The courgette will very quickly fill the space between the sweet corn, stop any weeds, and then the sweet corn will grow up, but it won't shade out the courgette sufficiently to stop production. Right, I'll put the rest in, and while I'm doing that, here are your jobs for the weekend. Early June is the perfect time to sow biennials such as foxgloves, wallflowers, sweet William, or honesty. Sprinkle the seeds thinly, like this honesty, on a seed tray of compost. Cover them over and then give them a good soak. They will then grow roots and foliage and be ready to plant it into their final position in early autumn. It's not too late to do the Chelsea chop. Now what this means is cutting back late flowering perennials like Rebeckias, Heleniums or Asters. This will result in a number of effects. The first is to stagger the heights of the plants. The second is to delay flowering in those you cut back, so therefore extend your flowering season. And also by cutting them back, you'll promote more side shoots, which means more flowers. You can sow carrots from mid-spring to early summer, but they germinate much better when the soil is warm, and also later sowings tend to avoid too much carrot fly damage. After raking the soil to a fine tilth, draw shallow drills with the edge of your hand. Sprinkle seed along these drills as thinly as you can and cover them over. If it doesn't rain for a few days, water them, and the seedlings should appear after 2 to 3 weeks and be ready to harvest sometime between 3 and 4 months. Come on. You going to come and sit down? Come on, you come up here. Good boy. Come and sit down. Come on, right up. That's a good boy. No. Well, if Ned will let me speak, I've got some leaves for my supper, and very soon we're going to be eating out in this new area. It's not quite there yet. And this is the new seating area, which is coming on. We're a bit more advanced here. And the idea here, of course, is to have as much fragrance as possible. Well, that's it for today. Ned is desperate to go for a walk, so I've got to go and do that. And I will see you back here next Friday. So until then, bye-bye. Okay? Good boy.